The sky hung low and gray over the Nebraska Territory that autumn of 1868, pressing down like a lead blanket on the endless grasslands. Wind whipped across the prairie, carrying dust and the scent of dying sage, rattling the warped boards of the ramshackle cabin that sat alone on the edge of civilization. Clara Bennett pressed her face against the grimy window, watching tumbleweeds dance across the barren yard. At 19, she had her mother's delicate features, high cheekbones, eyes the color of prairie sky, but years of hardship had stolen the softness from her face. Her hands, once meant for needlework and piano keys, were now rough from mending, washing, and tending what little they had left. The cabin groaned under the assault of another gust. It had been her mother's dream, this homestead, 160 acres of promise under the Homestead Act. But dreams had a way of dying out here, just like everything else. Her mother had been in the ground 3 winters now, taken by fever when the doctor was 2 days' ride away and wouldn't come anyway. Not for folks who couldn't pay. "Clara!" Her father's voice cracked like a whip from the other room. "Get in here, girl." She found him slumped at their rough-hewn table, an empty whiskey bottle rolling at his feet. Samuel Bennett had once been a proud man, a schoolteacher back in Ohio, with gentle hands and a love of books. But the prairie had broken him piece by piece. First the crops failed, then the cattle died, then his wife. Now all that remained was a hollow shell filled with cheap liquor and mounting debts. "Pa," she approached cautiously. These days, his mood swung wild as prairie weather. He didn't look up. His hands trembled as he fumbled with a crumpled piece of paper. $40, he muttered. $40 to Garrison. 20 to the general store. 15 to Doc Hadley. His bloodshot eyes finally met hers, and she saw something there that made her stomach clench. Not anger this time, but something worse. Defeat. "We'll manage. Pa, I can take in more washing. Maybe there ain't enough washing in the whole territory to pay what we owe." He laughed, a bitter sound like coyotes fighting over scraps. "But Garrison, he made me an offer." Clara's blood chilled. Jake Garrison ran the saloon in town, but everyone knew his real business. Girls disappeared around Garrison, ended up in places decent folks didn't speak about. "What kind of offer?" Samuel's gaze slid away. He reached for the bottle, remembered it was empty, and his hand fell slack. "A way to clear the debts. All of them." "Pa, no." The words came out as a whisper. "Whatever he wants, it's done." He slammed his fist on the table, making her jump, then, quieter, broken. "It's done. Clara, he's coming tonight." The room tilted. Clara gripped the table edge to steady herself. "You didn't—" "You couldn't," but she knew he had. It was written in the slump of his shoulders, in the way he couldn't meet her eyes. Her own father had sold her like livestock, like the last of their chickens they'd traded for cornmeal. "How much?" The question tasted like ashes. $100. Clears everything. Leave some besides. $100. The price of her life. Her freedom. Her future. Less than a good horse. She wanted to scream, to rage, to shake him until he became the father she remembered from childhood. Instead, she stood frozen as he mumbled about having no choice, about survival, about doing what needed doing. The sun was bleeding red across the horizon when the wagon appeared, black against the dying light. Clara watched from the window as 3 riders approached, Garrison's men, their faces hidden beneath wide-brimmed hats. Her small bundle of possessions lay at her feet, her mother's Bible, a spare dress, a photograph from better days. Samuel had locked himself in his room with a fresh bottle, leaving her to face this alone. Perhaps that was mercy, or perhaps it was the final cruelty. The door shook under a heavy fist. "Open up! Garrison's business!" Clara's hands trembled as she lifted the latch. The men who entered brought the stink of trail dust, tobacco, and something darker. The one in front, a scarred brute named Hayes, looked her over like appraising cattle. "This her?" He spat tobacco juice on her clean floor. "Don't look like much." "She's strong," came her father's voice. He'd emerged after all, wavering in his doorway, unable to let her go without trying to justify the unjustifiable. "Good worker, never sick a day." Hayes laughed. Oh, she'll be working all right. He grabbed Clara's arm, fingers digging deep enough to bruise. Get your things. Girl, long ride ahead. She pulled away long enough to gather her bundle, to take one last look around the cabin that had been both prison and sanctuary. Her father stood silhouetted in his doorway, and for a moment their eyes met. She searched for something, an apology, regret, any flicker of the man he used to be. But he turned away first, retreating into darkness. They bound her wrists with a rough rope that chafed and burned. When she was lifted into the wagon bed, she bit her lip hard enough to taste blood, rather than give them the satisfaction of hearing her cry out. As the wagon lurched into motion, she turned for one final glimpse of home. The cabin grew smaller, swallowed by gathering darkness and distance. She was sold by her father, the words echoed in her mind, a truth too terrible to fully grasp. Each turn of the wheels carried her further from everything she'd known, toward a fate she dared not imagine. The stars began to emerge, cold and distant as her father's final betrayal. But Clara Bennett was prairie-born, forged by wind and hardship. As the wagon rolled through the night toward whatever hell awaited, she made herself a promise. She would survive this. She would endure, and somehow, someday, she would be free. The coyotes sang their lonesome songs to the rising moon, and Clara closed her eyes, holding tight to that fragile thread of hope as the Nebraska territory faded into memory behind her. Ahead lay only darkness and the unknown, but she would meet it standing, even if she stood alone. The night swallowed them whole, and the prairie kept its secrets, as it always had. In the abandoned cabin, Samuel Bennett sat with his whiskey and his 30 pieces of silver, while somewhere in the vast darkness, his daughter rolled toward her fate, the words burning in her heart like a brand. She was sold by her father. The sun rose like a brass coin in a white-hot sky, turning the landscape into a furnace of red rock and scorched earth. They had been traveling for 3 days now, pushing deeper into the Badlands where civilization was just a memory, and the law might as well have been written in dust. Clara's wrists were raw beneath the rope, her lips cracked from thirst. Hayes and his 2 companions, a wiry man called Stokes and a silent brute named Big Tom, allowed her water twice a day, just enough to keep her valuable. She was merchandise now, and damaged goods brought lower prices. The wagon jolted over rocky terrain, each bump sending fresh pain through her aching body. Around them, the land had transformed from prairie grassland to a hellscape of mesas and arroyos, painted in shades of rust and bone. Dust devils danced across the barren flats like ghosts, and overhead, turkey vultures circled with patient hunger. How much further? Stokes whined, pulling his hat low against the merciless sun. 2 days to Fort Laramie, Hayes growled. Then another week to Denver, where Garrison's got buyers waiting. Clara's heart sank. Denver. She'd heard whispers of what happened to girls there, in the houses on Holiday Street. But she pushed down the fear, focusing instead on the landscape, memorizing every landmark, every possible escape route. The men had grown careless, thinking her broken by the journey. They didn't know she'd spent her whole life fighting drought, fighting poverty, fighting to keep hope alive in a hopeless place. By noon, the heat had become a living thing, pressing down with crushing weight. The horses plodded on, heads low, foam flecking their mouths. Even Hayes called a halt, seeking shade beneath a towering red rock formation that rose like a cathedral from the desert floor. Clara watched from the wagon as the men tended the horses and refilled canteens from their dwindling water barrels. Big Tom had wandered off to relieve himself behind a cluster of sagebrush. Stokes dozed against a rock, hat tilted over his eyes. Only Hayes remained alert, but even he seemed dulled by the heat. His attention focused on rolling a cigarette. The ropes had loosened slightly from sweat and constant rubbing. Clara worked her wrists carefully, silently, feeling the bonds give just a fraction, not enough to escape, but enough to keep hope alive. She studied the horizon, noting a line of cottonwoods in the distance that might mark a creek or river. Water meant life out here, Water meant a chance. "You're thinking of running?" Hayes's voice made her freeze. He was watching her with those cold eyes, smoke curling from his cigarette. "They all think about running. Some even try." He smiled, showing tobacco-stained teeth. "Ever see what the desert does to a body? Girl, sun strips the meat right off the bones. Found a runner once. What was left of him? Coyotes had been at him, but it was the sun that did most of the work." Clara met his gaze steadily, refusing to show fear. "I wasn't thinking of running." "Smart girl." He flicked ash into the wind. "Though between you and me might be a kinder fate than what's waiting in Denver." They pushed on through the afternoon, the landscape growing ever more desolate. Ancient pinnacles of rock jutted from the earth like broken teeth. The wagon trail wound between massive boulders carved by wind into fantastic shapes, skulls, castles, twisted figures that seemed to move in the corner of her eye. This was old land, older than memory, and it cared nothing for human suffering. As evening approached, they descended into a canyon where shadows pooled like dark water. The temperature dropped quickly once the sun dipped behind the canyon walls, and Clara shivered in her thin dress. They made camp beside a brackish spring, the horses drinking greedily despite the alkaline taste. Stokes built a fire while Big Tom unloaded supplies. Hayes kept his rifle across his knees, eyes scanning the canyon rim. "Indian country," he muttered. "Comanche been raiding all along the frontier. Cavalry can't catch them. They know every hidden trail, every waterhole." "Thought they were all on reservations now," Stokes said nervously. Hayes spat. "That's what the government wants folks to believe. But there's still bands out here, living the old way. They see our fire, might decide to pay a visit." Clara noticed how the men's casual cruelty gave way to fear at the mention of Comanche. She'd heard stories too, warriors who could ride like the wind itself, who appeared from nowhere and vanished just as quickly. But in the stories, they were also human beings defending their land, their way of life. Perhaps that made them less frightening to her than the men who held her captive. Night fell like a black curtain, revealing a sky ablaze with stars. Clara lay in the wagon bed, hands still bound, watching constellations wheel overhead. Somewhere in that vast darkness, her father was probably drinking himself into stupor, trying to forget what he'd done. She wondered if he'd already spent the money, if it had brought him any peace. She doubted it. Some betrayals carved hollows that could never be filled. The fire crackled and popped, sending sparks spiraling upward. The men took turns keeping watch, but exhaustion made them sloppy. During Stokes's watch, she heard him snoring softly. Big Tom kept nodding off, jerking awake with muffled curses. Only Hayes remained truly vigilant, but even he was fighting the weariness of hard travel. It was during the dead hour before dawn, when Big Tom was on watch and the fire had died to embers, that Clara heard it, a sound that didn't belong, the soft whisper of movement among the rocks, barely audible above the wind. Big Tom heard it too. He stood abruptly, peering into the darkness. "Who's there?" His voice cracked with fear. "Hayes, wake up!" But whatever was out there in the darkness had no intention of announcing itself. Clara lay very still, heart pounding, as the night held its breath and waited. She couldn't see them, but she could feel them, watching, evaluating, deciding. The wind picked up, whistling through the canyon like a lament. And in that wind, she could have sworn she heard the promise of something wild and free, something that knew no masters and acknowledged no chains. The desert was about to reveal another of its secrets, and Clara sensed that her fate was about to take a turn none of them could foresee. They came with the first pale light of dawn, materializing from the rocks like spirits given form. One moment the canyon was empty, save for wind and shadow. The next, mounted warriors surrounded the camp, their faces painted for war, arrows nocked and ready. Big Tom never had a chance to cry out. An arrow sprouted from his chest, and he toppled backward into the dying embers of the fire. Stokes scrambled for his gun, screaming incoherently. But a second arrow caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around before he collapsed. Hayes rolled behind a boulder, firing his rifle wildly into the air. "Comanche!" he roared. "Goddamn Comanche!" Clara pressed herself flat in the wagon bed, making herself small as the air filled with war cries and the whistle of arrows. The horses screamed and pulled at their picket lines, eyes rolling white with terror. Gunfire cracked and echoed off the canyon walls, but Hayes was one man against many, and his ammunition wouldn't last forever. Through the chaos, she saw him, a young warrior who moved differently from the others, while his companions closed in on Hayes's position. This one approached the wagon with measured steps. The rising sun caught his face, illuminating sharp cheekbones and eyes dark as obsidian. War paint traced bold patterns across his skin. But beneath it, she glimpsed something unexpected in his expression as he looked at her. He vaulted onto the wagon with fluid grace, and Clara instinctively shrank back. But instead of violence, his hands went to the ropes binding her wrists. A knife flashed, and suddenly she was free. Their eyes met for one suspended moment, predator and prey, except she couldn't tell which was which. "No!" Hayes burst from cover, rifle raised. "That's my property, you savage!" The words died as an arrow took him in the throat. He dropped the rifle, hands clawing at the shaft, then crumpled to the dust. In seconds, it was over. 3 men who had seemed so threatening, so in control, were now just cooling meat for the buzzards. The warriors converged on the camp, speaking rapidly in their own tongue. Some began gathering weapons and supplies, while others caught the panicked horses with practiced ease. Clara rubbed her raw wrists, uncertain whether she'd been rescued or simply changed hands. The young warrior who'd freed her stood nearby, watching her with an unreadable expression. One of the older warriors, his hair streaked with gray, gestured sharply at Clara and said something that sounded like a question. The younger one, her liberator, responded firmly, his tone suggesting argument. The exchange grew heated, other warriors joining in, until the young one raised his voice in what was clearly a declaration. Silence fell. The older warrior studied Clara with calculating eyes, then spoke again, more slowly. The young warrior nodded once and turned to her. "You come," he said in heavily accented English, the first words he'd spoken to her, delivered in a voice deep and strangely gentle. "Safe now. Safe." The word seemed impossible after days of terror. Yet something in his manner made her believe it, or perhaps she simply had no choice but to believe it. When he extended his hand to help her down from the wagon, she took it, his name. She learned through gestures and broken phrases, was Taza. He lifted her onto his painted pony as if she weighed nothing, then swung up behind her. His arm circled her waist to hold her steady, and she was acutely aware of his warmth against her back, so different from the cruel grip of her captors. They rode hard through the morning, following trails invisible to her eyes. The land flowed past in a blur of red rock and sage, the warriors moving as one fluid unit with their horses. Clara had thought she understood horsemanship from her farm life, but this was something else entirely, a fusion of human and animal that seemed almost supernatural. By midday, they'd left the canyon lands behind and entered a region of rolling hills dotted with juniper and pinon pine. Taza called a halt beside a clear stream, and Clara nearly cried at the sight of clean, fresh water. He helped her down, steadying her when her legs nearly buckled from exhaustion. While the other warriors tended the horses, Taza brought her water in a decorated gourd, watching as she drank deeply. He produced strips of dried meat from a pouch, offering them silently. The meat was tough and salty, but Clara ate gratefully, strength returning with each bite. She studied him as she ate. This strange savior who'd appeared from nowhere. He was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 25 winters, with the lean build of a rider. Scars marked his arms and chest, evidence of a hard life, but his movements held an easy grace. When he caught her staring, something that might have been amusement flickered in his dark eyes. The older warrior approached, speaking to Taza in low, urgent tones. Clara caught the word soldiers and saw Taza's expression harden. He responded sharply, gesturing toward her, and the older man's scowl deepened. It was clear her presence was a complication, a source of conflict. They rode through the afternoon and into evening, the pace relentless. Clara swayed with exhaustion, only Taza's steadying arm keeping her upright. She'd lost all sense of direction, knew only that they traveled deeper into a wilderness beyond the reach of any law she understood. As stars began to prick the darkening sky, they climbed a steep trail that switched back and forth up a mountainside. At the top, the land opened into a hidden valley where cook fires twinkled like earthbound stars. The camp, lodges of buffalo hide arranged in careful patterns, the sound of children's laughter, the smell of smoke and cooking meat. Their arrival caused a stir. People emerged from lodges to stare at the white woman Taza had brought among them. Clara felt the weight of their eyes, curious, hostile, wary. Women pulled children close, and men fingered weapons. She was the enemy here, representative of a race that had brought nothing but death and broken promises. Taza dismounted and helped her down, keeping a protective hand on her arm as he led her through the crowd. He spoke in clear, carrying tones, and though Clara couldn't understand the words, she heard her captors' names, Hayes, Stokes, and saw people's expressions shift. Whatever he was telling them, it seemed to temper their initial hostility. An elderly woman approached, her face a map of years and wisdom. She studied Clara intently, then spoke to Taza in rapid-fire syllables. He responded respectfully, and the woman nodded slowly. She gestured for Clara to follow, and Taza gave her an encouraging nod. The lodge the woman led her to smelled of sage and tanned hide. By firelight, she saw beautifully decorated parfleches, weapons hung with care, and soft buffalo robes. The woman pointed to a pile of furs, miming sleep. Then she brought water and a cloth, indicating Clara should wash, alone for the first time in days. Clara sank onto the furs and finally allowed herself to cry. Silent tears for the father who'd betrayed her, for the home she'd never see again, for the uncertain future that stretched before her. But mixed with the sorrow was something else, a flickering flame of hope. She was alive. She was free from Hayes and his evil intentions, and the young warrior who'd saved her had looked at her not as property, but as a human being deserving of rescue. Outside, she could hear the sounds of the camp settling for the night, soft voices, a baby's cry quickly soothed, the whinny of horses, so different from the harsh world she'd known, yet somehow not as foreign as she'd expected. These were people with families, communities, lives as complex as any white settlement. When Taza appeared at the lodge entrance, silhouetted against the stars, Clara felt her heart skip. He didn't enter, that would have been improper, but simply stood there, checking on her. Their eyes met across the threshold, and in that look was a promise. Safe, he'd said, and for the first time since her father had sold her soul for whiskey money. Clara dared to believe it might be true. She was no longer cargo to be delivered. She was under Taza's protection now, whatever that might mean. And as she lay back on the soft furs, listening to the night sounds of this strange new world, she whispered a prayer of gratitude to whatever spirits had sent a lone Comanche warrior to give her a new chance at life. The journey with Taza began at first light. When mist still clung to the valley floor, he came to the lodge where Clara had slept, speaking quietly to the elderly woman before gesturing for Clara to follow. She noticed how the other warriors watched them leave, some with disapproval, others with knowing looks that made her wonder what Taza had said or done to secure her departure from the main camp. They rode alone this time, just the two of them on his painted pony, heading deeper into lands no white surveyor had ever mapped. The landscape constantly shifted, from pine-covered slopes to vast meadows where elk grazed in the morning light, from narrow canyons where their passage disturbed nesting eagles to wide rivers running cold and clear from mountain snow. Taza spoke little, but his silence wasn't the oppressive quiet of her captors. When they stopped to rest the horse or refill water gourds, he would point to things and name them in his language: rock, water, cloud, bird. Clara repeated the words, stumbling over unfamiliar sounds, and sometimes caught what might have been a smile ghosting across his stoic features. On the third day, they were climbing through dense forest when Taza suddenly tensed. He pulled the horse to a stop, head tilted, listening. Clara heard it too, the crash of something large moving through undergrowth. Taza slipped from the horse in one fluid motion, bow in hand, positioning himself between Clara and the sound. A massive grizzly emerged from the trees not 30 yards away, rising on hind legs to test the air. Clara's breath caught. She'd heard tales of these monsters but never seen one, 8 feet of muscle and fury, claws like curved daggers. The bear dropped to all fours and huffed, considering them with small, intelligent eyes. Taza stood perfectly still, arrow nocked but not drawn. He began to speak in low, measured tones, not to Clara but to the bear itself, his voice carrying a strange rhythm. Almost like a chant, the bear swayed slightly, massive head tilting, for endless moments. Predator faced predator in some primal communication Clara couldn't fathom. Then, with a final snort, the grizzly turned and lumbered away, disappearing into the forest shadows. Taza lowered his bow, glancing back at Clara with an expression that seemed almost amused at her wide-eyed terror. "Bear, brother," he said in his halting English, the most words he'd strung together yet. "We speak, he go." That night they camped beside a hot spring that steamed in the cool air. Taza built a small fire and disappeared into the darkness, returning with 2 rabbits he'd snared. As he prepared them for cooking, Clara watched his efficient movements, the careful way he used every part of the animals, wasting nothing. When he offered her the roasted meat, their fingers brushed, and she felt a jolt like lightning. He must have felt it too, for he pulled back quickly, but not before she saw something flicker in those dark eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or recognition of something neither of them had expected. The next morning brought the first snow, fat, lazy flakes that dusted the world in white. Taza produced a buffalo robe from his pack, draping it around Clara's shoulders. The gesture was practical, but the gentleness in it made her throat tight. When had anyone last shown her such simple kindness? They descended into a valley where a river wound like a silver snake, its banks lined with cottonwoods burning gold in autumn glory. Here Taza called another halt, this time producing fishing line and hooks. He showed Clara how to bait the hook with insects found under river stones, how to read the water for likely spots. While they fished, he began to speak more, mixing Comanche words with broken English and eloquent gestures. Clara learned he was taking her somewhere specific, not just wandering. When she tried to ask where, he pointed north and said something that sounded like safe place, though she sensed there was more to it than that. A shadow passed overhead, a golden eagle riding the thermals. Taza watched it with an expression of such longing that Clara found herself asking, "Free?" He looked at her sharply, then nodded. "Eagle free, Comanche." He made a gesture that seemed to encompass the whole landscape. Once free, now. He drew boundaries in the air, his face darkening. Clara understood. The corralling of his people onto reservations, the loss of the buffalo herds, the encroachment of settlements like the one she'd called home. She was the enemy. Yet here he was, protecting her. The contradiction of it sat heavy between them. That night the temperature plummeted, despite the buffalo robe and the fire. Clara shivered uncontrollably. She woke to find Taza had moved his bedroll closer, not touching but near enough that she could feel his warmth. In the darkness, pretending to sleep, she inched closer until her back barely brushed his. He didn't pull away. Morning found them riding through a landscape transformed by heavy frost, every branch and blade of grass jeweled with ice crystals. They climbed steadily, the horse laboring through deepening snow. Clara pressed closer to Taza's warmth, no longer caring about propriety. Survival trumped all social niceties out here. They crested a ridge to reveal a sight that stole her breath, a vast canyon painted in layers of red and gold, its depths lost in purple shadow. Snow crowned the rim, but far below she could see the green ribbon of a river, signs of life in the harsh landscape. "Home," Taza said simply. The trail down was treacherous, switching back and forth across the canyon face. Clara closed her eyes and trusted Taza's skill, his sure guidance of the horse along paths where one misstep meant death. When they finally reached the canyon floor, she was trembling from more than cold. Here, protected by towering walls, the temperature was milder. They followed the river through groves of oak and willow, past ancient ruins that spoke of peoples long vanished. Taza pointed out petroglyphs carved into cliff faces, spirals, handprints, figures that might have been human or spirit. As afternoon waned, they came upon their destination, a sheltered cove where a smaller canyon branched off, a spring-fed pool reflecting the sky like a mirror. Ancient cottonwoods provided shade, and Clara saw signs of old camps, fire rings, worn paths, a shelter of branches and stones. Taza helped her dismount, and she stood on shaking legs, overwhelmed by the journey's end. He watched her carefully, seeming to gauge her reaction. When she smiled, the first real smile in what felt like forever, something in his rigid posture eased. That night, as they sat by the fire sharing dried meat and wild berries he'd gathered, the silence between them felt different, comfortable, complete. When Clara shivered, Taza moved closer, and this time there was no pretense of accident. His arm came around her, warm and solid, and she let herself lean into him. Above them, stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, and somewhere in the darkness a wolf sang to its mate. Clara thought of her father, probably drunk in their empty cabin, and felt only a distant sorrow. That life was behind her now, sold away for whiskey money, but here in this hidden canyon, protected by a warrior who asked nothing of her but trust. She glimpsed something that might become a future. When Taza spoke her name, Clara, the foreign sound soft in his accent, she felt something shift inside her chest. "Taza," she whispered back, and saw his eyes widen at hearing his name on her lips. The fire crackled between them, casting dancing shadows on ancient stone. And in that moment, in that place outside of time and civilization's reach, two souls from different worlds recognized something in each other that transcended language, culture, and the bitter history that should have made them enemies. The journey through the wilderness had ended, but Clara sensed another journey was just beginning, one measured not in miles crossed, but in the careful navigation of two hearts finding their way toward something neither had dared name. The Comanche village appeared as the morning mist lifted, lodges arranged in careful circles along the river bend. Smoke rose from cooking fires, and Clara could hear the sounds of daily life, children laughing, dogs barking, the rhythmic thud of women grinding corn. Her stomach clenched with apprehension as Taza guided their horse down the final slope. Their arrival caused an immediate stir. People emerged from lodges, conversations dying mid-sentence. Clara felt the weight of dozens of eyes, suspicious, hostile, curious. Women pulled children behind their skirts, and several young warriors moved to intercept them, hands resting on weapons. An older warrior with an air of authority strode forward, his face carved from granite. He spoke sharply to Taza, gesturing at Clara with obvious displeasure. Taza dismounted and responded in measured tones, but Clara could hear the steel beneath his respectful manner. The exchange grew heated, drawing more onlookers. A woman pushed through the crowd, tall, striking, with the bearing of someone accustomed to respect. She looked at Clara with undisguised contempt, then turned to Taza, her words flying like arrows. Clara didn't need to understand the language to recognize the fury of a woman who felt betrayed. This must be someone who'd expected Taza's attention, perhaps even his commitment. Taza stood his ground, speaking firmly. When he reached up to help Clara dismount, the woman spat at his feet and stalked away. Several others followed her, their message clear. The white woman was not welcome here. An elderly woman approached, her face weathered but her eyes sharp as obsidian. She circled Clara slowly, examining her like a horse at market. She fingered Clara's blonde hair, prodded her arms to test for strength, all while maintaining a running commentary that drew chuckles from the crowd. Finally, she spoke to Taza, her tone dismissive. Taza's jaw tightened, but he responded respectfully. Then he did something that silenced the crowd. He removed a decorated war shield from his horse and held it high, making what was clearly a formal declaration. The elderly woman's eyes widened. Several warriors stepped forward as if to protest, but the granite-faced leader raised a hand for silence. He studied Taza for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Whatever Taza had declared, it carried weight. The leader spoke at length, his words formal and measured. When he finished, some in the crowd dispersed, though many lingered to stare. The hostility hadn't vanished, but it had shifted to wary acceptance. Taza led Clara to a lodge set slightly apart from the others. Inside, it was sparse but clean. Buffalo robes, a fire pit, basic tools and weapons hung on the walls. He gestured for her to sit, then crouched beside her, searching for words. "You, he struggled, then placed his hand over his heart. "Under my protection, safe, but must learn." He gestured toward the village. "Learn our ways, work, show worth." Clara nodded, understanding. She was on trial here, needing to prove herself worthy of the protection he'd claimed for her. The weight of it settled on her shoulders. If she failed, what then? The first days were brutal. The women who'd been assigned to teach her took obvious pleasure in giving her the hardest tasks. Clara's hands, already rough from farm work, soon bled from scraping hides. Her back ached from carrying water from the river. When she made mistakes, and there were many, they laughed and corrected her with sharp slaps and sharper words. She learned to build and tend fires the Comanche way, to identify edible plants, to sew with sinew instead of thread. The work was harder than anything on the farm, but Clara gritted her teeth and endured. She'd survived her father's betrayal and Hayes's cruelty. She could survive this too. Gradually, she began to pick up words in their language. Water, fire, lodge, work, thank you. The children were the first to warm to her, creeping closer each day, giggling when she mangled their words. One little girl, no more than 5, took to following Clara around, chattering constantly and patiently correcting her pronunciation. Taza watched from a distance, his presence a shield against the worst hostility. In the evenings, he would visit briefly, bringing small gifts, a sharper scraping tool, softer leather to protect her hands, once a handful of sweet berries that tasted like summer. Their conversations remained halting, built on gestures and simple words. But something deeper grew in the silence between words. The woman who'd confronted Taza that first day, Clara learned her name was Ayanna, made her displeasure known at every opportunity. She would brush past Clara roughly, accidentally, knock over her water gourds, speak loudly about the weakness of white women whenever Clara was near. The other women watched these exchanges carefully, waiting to see how Clara would respond. The breaking point came when Ayanna deliberately ruined a hide Clara had spent days preparing. Claiming Clara's incompetence had attracted flies. Clara stared at the ruined work, fury building in her chest. Back home, she would have swallowed the injustice, turned the other cheek. But this wasn't home, and meekness would earn her nothing here. She stood slowly, meeting Ayanna's triumphant gaze. Then, deliberately, Clara walked to where Ayanna's own hides hung drying. She examined them critically, finding a small flaw. There always was one. She pointed it out loudly, using the few Comanche words she knew, then demonstrated the proper technique with exaggerated patience. The watching women went silent. Ayanna's face flushed dark with rage. For a moment, Clara thought she might strike her. Then, unexpectedly, one of the older women laughed, a rich, appreciative sound. Others joined in, and even the granite-faced leader, passing by, allowed a small smile to crack his stern features. Ayanna stormed off, and from that day, while not exactly friendly, the worst of the harassment stopped. Clara had shown she wouldn't be cowed, and that earned a grudging respect. Slowly, the village rhythms became her own. She rose with first light, tended fires, prepared food, worked hides, gathered plants. Her Comanche vocabulary grew, and with it, Her understanding of their world. These weren't the savages of frontier horror stories, but a complex people with deep traditions, elaborate social structures, and a profound connection to the land. She learned their stories around evening fires, tales of creation, of heroes and monsters, of the time before the white man came when buffalo covered the earth like a brown sea. She saw their grief for what was being lost, their fierce determination to preserve what remained. And always, there was Taza. He began teaching her to ride properly, not the farm girl way, but as the Comanche rode, as one with the horse. He showed her how to read the land, to find water in the desert, to know from the flight of birds whether danger approached. Their lessons became the highlight of her days, islands of peace in the constant struggle for acceptance. One evening, as purple twilight painted the canyon walls, he taught her the Comanche names for the stars. They sat outside the village on a high rock, the world spread below them. When Clara successfully identified the constellation he'd shown her, his rare smile made her heart race. "You learn good," he said, his English improving as her Comanche grew. "Strong, not like—" He gestured toward the east, toward civilization. "Not weak. I was weak," Clara admitted. "I let my father, let them—" She couldn't finish. Taza's hand covered hers, warm and calloused. "No, you survive. That is strength." He was quiet for a moment, then added, "My mother taken by Mexican traders when I was small, sold far south, never saw again." His voice carried old pain, carefully controlled. "I know what it means to be sold." Clara turned her hand palm up, lacing her fingers through his. They sat in silence as stars emerged one by one, two souls who understood loss finding comfort in shared presence. Below them, the village fires twinkled like earthbound stars, and for the first time since leaving Nebraska, Clara felt something that might have been belonging. When they finally returned to the village, a few people noted their joined hands. Some frowned, others nodded knowingly. Ayanna watched from her lodge entrance, her expression unreadable. But Clara walked past with her head high, Taza's presence beside her a declaration as clear as any words. She was still an outsider, might always be, but she was learning, adapting, proving her worth day by day. And in Taza's steady presence, his patient teaching, his growing smiles, she found an anchor in this strange new world. The girl who'd been sold by her father was slowly disappearing, replaced by someone stronger, someone who might one day truly belong to this land and these people. That night, as she lay in her solitary lodge listening to the camp settle into sleep, Clara whispered the Comanche words for the stars Taza had taught her. Each one felt like a small victory, a step further from the helpless girl in the wagon and closer to whatever she was becoming. The warning came with the dawn wind, riders approaching from the east, their dust cloud visible against the rising sun. The village erupted into controlled chaos. Warriors grabbed weapons, women gathered children, and the elderly began packing essential items with practiced efficiency. Clara had seen this dance before in her weeks with the tribe, but never with such urgency. Taza appeared at her lodge, his face grim. "Soldiers," he said tersely. "Many, looking for you." Clara's blood chilled. Somehow, word of a white woman among the Comanche had reached the authorities. Perhaps Hayes had connections she hadn't known about, or perhaps her father had reported her kidnapping in a fit of guilt-driven conscience. Either way, the blue-coated cavalry was coming. The leader, who Clara had learned was called Chief Nokoni, called a council. Warriors gathered in a tight circle, voices rising in heated debate. Some gestured angrily toward Clara, clearly arguing she should be given up to avoid bloodshed. Others, including Taza, spoke forcefully against it. Clara watched from a distance, understanding enough Comanche now to follow the basic argument. Her presence had brought danger to people who'd done nothing but offer her sanctuary. Ayanna stood with those who wanted Clara gone, her voice cutting through the debate. She pointed at Clara, then at the approaching dust cloud, her meaning clear. Was one white woman worth risking their children, their elders, their way of life? Clara stepped forward before she could lose her courage. "I'll go," she said in halting Comanche. No blood for me? I go." The circle fell silent. Taza turned to her, something fierce flashing in his eyes. "No," he said firmly. "You are under my protection. I have spoken this before all, and I release you from it." Clara replied, though the words tore at her heart. "These are your people. I won't be the reason." Her words were cut off by a scout's whistle. The soldiers were closer than expected, perhaps 2 hours away. Chief Nokoni raised his hand for silence, then spoke decisively. The village would move to their defensive positions in the canyon narrows. They would talk first, fight if necessary. As warriors took positions among the rocks and women hurried children to safety. Taza gripped Clara's arm. "You don't understand," he said urgently. "Soldiers won't take you safe. They say rescue, but—" His jaw clenched. "I've seen what they do to women they rescue from Indians. Better you die here than—" A bugle call echoed across the canyon, cutting off his words. The cavalry had arrived sooner than expected. Through the narrow canyon mouth, Clara could see the long blue line of mounted soldiers, their brass buttons and weapons glinting in the morning sun. At their head rode a captain with elaborate whiskers, his bearing stiff with military pride. Chief Nokoni rode out to meet them, accompanied by several warriors. Taza stayed with Clara, his bow strung, every muscle tense. From their position behind a cluster of boulders, they could hear the captain's voice carrying on the wind. "We know you have a white woman captive," the captain declared. "Miss Clara Bennett, taken by force from her father's homestead. Return her immediately, and we'll overlook this transgression, refuse, and face the consequences." Clara's heart sank. Her father had reported her kidnapped, spinning a tale to save his reputation. She almost laughed at the bitter irony. Sold as property, then claimed as stolen goods. Chief Nokoni responded in broken English, denying any knowledge of white captives. The captain's voice grew harder. "Don't lie to me, savage. We have reliable reports. Produce the woman, or we'll take your village apart looking for her." The tension stretched taut as a bowstring. Clara could see warriors hidden among the rocks. Arrows knocked. The soldiers sat their horses uneasily, hands near weapons. One wrong move, one misunderstanding, and blood would flow like the river that had carved this canyon. Clara made her decision. Before Taza could stop her, she emerged from cover and walked toward the parley. Gasps and shouts erupted from both sides. The captain's eyes lit with triumph, while Chief Nokoni's face darkened with resignation. "Miss Bennett," the captain called. "Thank God. Come here immediately. You're safe now." Clara stopped between the two groups, her voice carrying clearly. "Captain, I need you to understand something. I was not kidnapped by these people." The captain's whiskers twitched with confusion. "The trauma has confused you. Miss, your father explained how you were taken." "My father sold me." The words erupted from her like water through a broken dam. "Sold me to men who meant to take me to Denver, to a life of... He took money for me, Captain, like I was livestock." Murmurs rippled through the soldiers. The captain shifted uncomfortably. "That's a serious accusation. Miss, perhaps you're confused. The men who bought me were named Hayes, Stokes, and Big Tom. Check with Fort Laramie. They were known there. The Comanche killed them when they attacked their camp. And this warrior," she gestured to Taza, who had followed her, "saved my life. I've been here of my own free will." The captain's face reddened. "Regardless of the circumstances, you can't stay with these savages. It isn't proper. Your place is with your own kind." "My own kind sold me," Clara said quietly. "These savages showed me more humanity than I ever knew in civilization." A young lieutenant leaned toward the captain, whispering urgently. Clara caught fragments. "Scandal. Newspapers. Questions." The captain's scowl deepened. The last thing the army wanted was stories about white fathers selling their daughters, about Comanches showing more honor than Christian folk. "Miss Bennett," the captain tried again, his tone now wheedling. "Think of your reputation. No decent white man will have you after you've lived with Indians. Come with us now, and we can say you were rescued before any damage was done." Clara felt Taza stiffen beside her. Around them, she sensed the warriors preparing for violence, reading the insult in the captain's words. One wrong word now, and the canyon would run red. "Captain," Clara said, lifting her chin, "I appreciate your concern for my reputation, but I've made my choice. I'm staying here." The captain's face purpled. "I won't allow it. Sergeant, prepare to—" "Captain," the young lieutenant spoke up, his voice urgent. "We have no legal authority to force her. She's not a minor, and she's stated she's here willingly. If we take her by force and she tells her story—" He let the implications hang. The captain sat frozen for a long moment, military duty warring with political reality. "Finally," he spat to the side. "This is on your head, woman. When they tire of you, when you come crawling back to civilization, don't expect sympathy." He wheeled his horse sharply. "Column, about face. We're leaving this godforsaken place." As the soldiers rode away, their bugle calls fading into distance, Clara's knees nearly buckled. Taza's strong arm caught her, held her upright. Around them, warriors lowered weapons, women emerged from hiding, and life slowly returned to normal rhythms. Chief Nokoni approached, his weathered face unreadable. He studied Clara for a long moment, then spoke. "You could have gone, been safe with your people. These are my people now." Clara replied in Comanche, the words coming easier than she'd expected. The chief's stern face cracked into something that might have been a smile. He nodded once, then turned to address the gathered tribe. His words were formal, declarative. Clara caught enough to understand. She had chosen them over her own kind, had risked herself to prevent bloodshed. She was no longer just under Taza's protection, but under the protection of the entire band. Even Ayana approached, her perpetual hostility replaced by something like grudging respect. "You have courage," she said simply, then walked away before Clara could respond. That night, the village celebrated their bloodless victory with dancing and storytelling. Clara sat beside Taza at the great fire, no longer separated from him by propriety or uncertainty. When he took her hand openly, interlacing their fingers, no one protested. "You gave up your world," he said quietly, his English much improved from their daily lessons together. "For us? For me?" "No," Clara corrected, squeezing his hand. "I chose a better world. I chose you, under the vast canopy of stars, surrounded by the sounds of celebration." Clara felt the last chains of her old life fall away. She'd been sold by her father, yes, but that betrayal had led her here, to a people who valued courage over birthright, to a man who saw her as a person rather than property, to a life where she could be more than just some farmer's daughter or some man's wife. The girl named Clara Bennett was gone, buried with the 3 men in an unnamed canyon. In her place sat a woman reborn, claimed by the wind and stone and endless sky of Comanche country. And when Taza whispered her new name, the one the tribe would know her by, she felt her heart expand to hold this new identity, this new life, this new love that had grown from the ashes of her greatest loss. The first snow came early that year, blanketing the canyon in pristine white. The band had already begun their journey to winter grounds, following ancient paths known only to their people. Clara rode her own horse now, a spotted mare Taza had gifted her after she'd proven herself worthy. She'd learned to pack a lodge, to move camp efficiently, to be part of the flowing river of people and horses that moved as one across the landscape. They traveled for days through terrain that shifted from canyonlands to rolling plains, the horizon stretching endless under pewter skies. Clara had thought she knew hardship from her farm life, but this nomadic existence demanded a different kind of strength. When blizzards struck, they huddled together for warmth. When game was scarce, they tightened their belts and shared what little they had. Yet there was a freedom in it, a connection to the land and seasons that her former life had never offered. During the journey, Clara proved herself in unexpected ways. When little Singing Bird fell ill with fever, Clara recognized the symptoms from her mother's teachings about healing. Working alongside the tribe's medicine woman, She helped prepare willow bark tea and cool compresses for 3 nights. She sat vigil with the child's mother until finally the fever broke. The gratitude in that mother's eyes transcended any language barrier. Another time, when scouts reported buffalo sign to the north, Clara asked to join the women who would follow the hunt. Ayanna scoffed, but Chief Nokoni, remembering Clara's courage with the soldiers, allowed it. Clara watched in awe as the warriors coordinated their attack on the small herd, moving like wind across grass. When the successful hunters returned, she worked alongside the other women, learning to use every part of the sacred animal: meat for food, hide for shelter and clothing, bones for tools, sinew for thread. Nothing was wasted. Everything had purpose. It was during the buffalo processing that Clara truly felt the shift in how the people viewed her. The elderly woman who'd first inspected her now taught her with patience, showing her the proper way to separate meat from bone, how to prepare the hide for tanning. Women who'd once whispered behind their hands now included her in their conversations, sharing gossip and laughter as they worked. Taza watched these changes with quiet pride. In the evenings, when the day's travel was done, he would find her at her tasks and simply be near, their companionship comfortable as a well-worn blanket. They spoke more freely now, mixing Comanche and English, teaching each other words and concepts. Clara learned that Taza meant gift in their language, that his full name meant Gift of the Eagle, earned when he'd rescued a sacred eagle chick as a boy and raised it to adulthood. "And my name?" Clara asked one star-bright night. The tribe had been calling her something she didn't quite understand, though she recognized the word for heart within it. Taza smiled, a sight that still made her pulse quicken. "Natsi Tua," he said carefully. "New heart, because you left your old heart behind and grew a new one here, with us." The winter camp lay in a sheltered valley where hot springs steamed and grass stayed green even under snow. Here, the band would wait out the hardest months, telling stories, making tools and clothes, strengthening the bonds that held them together. Clara threw herself into learning winter skills, how to decorate hides with beadwork, how to make pemmican that would last through scarce times, how to keep a lodge warm with minimal fuel. One night, as wind howled outside and snow piled against the lodges, the people gathered for winter storytelling. The eldest warriors and women took turns sharing the sacred stories, how the world was made, how the Comanche came to be, the great deeds of heroes long past. Clara sat mesmerized, understanding more than she'd expected, the rhythmic cadence of the language carrying meaning beyond words. Then Chief Nokoni called upon Taza to tell a story. Clara expected a traditional tale, but Taza stood and began speaking of a girl sold by her father, of warriors who saved her from evil men, of courage that transcended blood and birth. He told Clara's story, but transformed it into something mythic, weaving it into the larger tapestry of Comanche narrative. When he finished, the people nodded approval, and Clara felt tears on her cheeks. Her story was now part of their story, her journey woven into the fabric of the tribe. As winter deepened, Clara and Taza's bond grew stronger. He taught her to read weather sign, to know when storms approached by the behavior of birds and the feel of the wind. She taught him English words for concepts Comanche didn't have, and they laughed at the inadequacy of both languages to capture certain truths. When she successfully tracked and snared her first rabbit alone, his proud smile warmed her more than any fire. The change in their relationship came gradually, like ice melting under spring sun. Touches lingered longer, his hand steadying her as she learned a new skill, her fingers brushing his as they worked side by side. The whole tribe seemed to be watching, waiting. Even Ayanna had stopped her hostility, moving on to court a young warrior from another band who joined them for the winter. One clear night, when the aurora danced green and gold across the northern sky, Taza led Clara away from camp to watch the display. They sat wrapped in buffalo robes, her back against his chest, his arms encircling her. The lights above seemed to mirror the feelings surging between them, wild, beautiful, impossible to capture or contain. My people say the lights are spirits dancing. Taza murmured against her hair. The ancestors celebrating. What are they celebrating? Clara asked, though her racing heart already knew. New beginnings, two hearts finding each other across great distances. He turned her to face him, his dark eyes serious. Clara, Natsia Aitua, I would speak something. She waited, barely breathing. Among my people, when a man wishes to court a woman, he must prove himself worthy, must show he can provide, protect. I have watched you become one of us, seen your strength, your courage. You could have any warrior you choose, but I wish. Clara silenced him with a touch to his lips. I chose long ago, she whispered. That day you cut my bonds and looked at me like I was a person, not property. Every day since, I choose you again. His kiss was answer enough, gentle at first, then deeper, carrying promises of all the days to come. Above them, the spirits danced their approval across the winter sky. When they returned to camp, many knowing smiles greeted them. The elderly woman cackled something that made others laugh, and Clara caught enough to know it was about time. Chief Nokoni nodded approvingly, while Taza's warrior friends called out good-natured teasing that made him duck his head even as he smiled. That night, Clara lay in her lodge, not alone now, for Taza had moved his belongings to join hers with the tribe's blessing and marveled at the journey that had brought her here. From the depths of despair, sold and betrayed, she had found something she'd never dared dream of. Love. Yes, but more than that, a place where she belonged, a people who had become family, a life with meaning beyond mere survival. No regrets? Taza asked softly in the darkness, sensing her wakefulness. Clara turned in his arms, tracing the strong lines of his face. How can I regret the path that led me to you? I was sold by my father, yes, but a lone Comanche warrior gave me a new life, a new name, new heart. The girl he sold is gone. The woman you freed is here, is yours, is home. Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in peaceful white, but inside the lodge, warmed by buffalo robes and each other. Clara and Taza began writing the next chapter of their story, a story of two people who'd found each other across impossible odds, whose love would bridge two worlds even as those worlds shifted and changed around them. The winter stretched ahead, full of challenges and changes, but Clara faced it without fear, her new heart strong and sure, her place in the world finally, truly found. Spring came to the high country like a shy bride, hesitant at first, then bursting forth in glory. Mountain meadows erupted with wildflowers, Indian paintbrush, lupine, and prairie roses that perfumed the warming air. The band prepared to leave winter camp, and Clara moved among them with the easy confidence of one who belonged. Her blonde hair, now often braided in the Comanche style and adorned with beaded leather, caught the sun as she worked. She could read the signs now, which plants were ready for harvest, where game would gather, how clouds building over distant peaks meant storms by evening. Her hands, once soft despite farm work, were now strong and capable, marked by the honest labor of survival. When she spoke at council meetings, her voice carried weight. Natsi Yi Tua, new heart, had earned her place through winter's trials and spring's promise. On a morning bright with birdsong, as the camp bustled with preparation for the seasonal move, scouts rode in with news that silenced all activity. White settlers were moving into the valley 3 days' ride to the east, the valley where the band had summered for generations, where the best hunting grounds lay. Chief Nokoni called council immediately. Clara sat beside Taza, her presence no longer questioned. The debate was fierce. Some warriors argued for driving the settlers out before they could establish claims. Others, including Nokoni, counseled caution. The army would come if settlers were attacked. The reservation boundaries were being drawn ever tighter. One wrong move could mean the destruction of the band. We still have the high country, Nokoni said finally. We go where whites cannot follow, cannot survive. We adapt as the wind adapts to the mountain. Clara felt the sorrow in those words. Each year, The free territory shrank. Each season brought new restrictions, new incursions. She'd lived on both sides now and understood what the others perhaps couldn't. The relentless hunger of her former people for land, for progress, for claiming every wild place and making it tame. They moved camp under a waning moon, traveling higher into mountains where the air grew thin and eagles soared at eye level. Clara rode beside Taza, leading pack horses loaded with their lodge and belongings. Behind them, the elderly and children rode travois, while warriors ranged ahead and beside, always watchful. In a high valley where columbines grew wild and snow-fed streams ran crystal clear, they made their summer camp. It was beautiful beyond words, but Clara could see the worry in older eyes. This wasn't their traditional ground. The hunting would be harder, the growing season shorter. They were being pushed to the margins, to the places no one else wanted. Yet, Clara threw herself into making this new place home. She gathered unfamiliar plants with the medicine woman, learning their properties. She helped the children find new swimming holes, new places to play. When young warriors grumbled about the poor hunting, she reminded them of worse hardships survived. Her optimism, hard-won from her own journey through darkness, became a quiet strength others drew upon. One golden afternoon, as she scraped a hide beside the stream, Ayana approached and sat beside her. They worked in companionable silence for a time before Ayana spoke. "I hated you," she said simply. "Thought you would make him weak, turn him from his people." Clara continued working, waiting. "I was wrong." Ayana continued. "You make him stronger. Make all of us remember that courage comes in many forms." She paused, then added with a slight smile. "Besides, my new husband says I was foolish to chase a man whose heart already belonged elsewhere." They shared a quiet laugh, and Clara felt another barrier fall. In this harsh land, she'd found sisters she never had in her former life. As summer ripened, Clara and Taza rode often into the highest reaches, partly to scout for game, partly to be alone. On one such ride, they discovered a hidden box canyon with a spring-fed pool, walls painted with ancient symbols, and a sense of sacred peace. Taza dismounted and stood very still, reading signs Clara couldn't see. "This is old place," he said reverently. "Holy place. My grandfather's grandfather spoke of it, but none knew where. Clara, do you see? The spirits led us here, to this refuge." They brought Chief Nokoni and the elders to see. The old medicine man wept openly, recognizing symbols from stories, finding proof that the ancestors had sheltered here in times of trouble. The band moved camp again, settling near this sacred canyon that seemed to offer protection from the encroaching world. In this place of power, Taza and Clara's wedding ceremony was held as autumn touched the aspens with gold. She wore a dress of white doeskin decorated with elk teeth and porcupine quills, painstakingly made by the women who now called her sister. Taza wore his finest war shirt, eagle feathers in his hair, paint marking his victories and honors. Chief Nokoni himself performed the ceremony, binding their wrists with a cord of braided sweetgrass as they made their vows. Clara spoke hers in fluent Comanche now, promising to stand beside Taza through whatever trials came, to be mother to his children, to honor his people as her own until her last breath. When they drank from the same cup, sealing their union, the ululation of celebrating women echoed off canyon walls. That night, as drums beat and the people danced their joy, Clara caught a glimpse of their future in the leaping firelight. It wouldn't be easy. The world was changing, pressing in, demanding adaptation or death. There would be loss, heartbreak, battles both physical and spiritual. But there would also be this love that transcended old boundaries, children who would carry both bloods forward, the enduring strength of people who refused to vanish. Much later, as dawn touched the peaks, Clara and Taza sat wrapped in one blanket, watching the world wake. In the growing light, everything seemed possible, that love could bridge any divide, that courage could overcome any obstacle, that the human spirit could survive any betrayal and emerge stronger. "Your father," Taza said quietly. "Do you ever think of him?" Clara considered, searching her heart for honest answer. Sometimes I think he was broken by loss, by failure, by the harsh demands of a harsh land. I've forgiven him. I think, without his betrayal, I'd never have found this life. Found you. She turned to meet his eyes. That night he sold me feels like something that happened to another person, in another lifetime. You are not her anymore. Taza agreed, touching the beaded ornament in her hair that marked her as a married woman of the people. You are Natsiyitua, beloved of Taza, daughter of the Comanche, woman of two worlds who belongs fully to both. Below them, the camp stirred to life. Children's laughter rang out. Dogs barked. Women called to each other as they prepared the morning meal. It was the sound of life continuing despite everything, of people who'd endured centuries of change and would endure centuries more, adapting, surviving, keeping the core of who they were alive. Clara rose to begin her day's work, but Taza caught her hand. The old words, he said softly. Say them once more, so we remember the journey. She smiled, understanding, in a voice made husky by emotion. Clara spoke. She was sold by her father, but a lone Comanche warrior gave her a new life, a new name, new heart. And the new heart, Taza prompted. The new heart is strong, Clara continued, words she'd added to the tale. It beats with the rhythm of horse hooves on earth, of wind through canyon walls, of two peoples joined in one love. The new heart knows that from the greatest sorrow can come the greatest joy, that sometimes we must lose everything to find who we truly are. Hand in hand, they descended to join their people, to face whatever the changing world would bring. Behind them, the rising sun painted the mountains in shades of rose and gold, blessing their path forward, and somewhere in the vast blue sky, an eagle circled, crying its wild freedom to any who had ears to hear. The story that began with betrayal and chains had transformed into something else entirely, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, to love's power to heal the deepest wounds, to the possibility of finding home in the most unexpected places. Clara's journey from sold property to cherished wife, from captive to free woman, from Clara Bennett to Natsiyitua, was complete. Yet, in another sense, it was just beginning. Each new day offering fresh chances to choose love over fear, hope over despair, the wild freedom of the heart over the cages others would build. In the Comanche camp hidden high in the mountains, life went on. And with it, the story of a woman who lost everything only to gain the world. Thank you, dear listeners, for joining me around this campfire tonight to hear Clara's tale. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Are you in your car on a long commute, cozy in bed, or perhaps even camping under the stars yourself? Please subscribe to Wild West Campfire and share your thoughts in the comments below. What part of Clara and Taza's journey touched your heart the most? Until we meet again beside the fire, keep the spirit of the Old West alive in your hearts.